The first time my son called me in 5 years, he did not ask how I was. He did not ask whether my arthritis had worsened, whether I still kept his father's old workbench in the garage, or whether I had spent another Christmas eating dinner across from an empty chair. He asked why there was a for sale sign in front of the family house. His voice was sharp. "You can't sell it," he said. I looked through the kitchen window at the sign moving in the wind and answered, "You haven't visited this house in 5 years. Why does it matter now?" He became silent. Then he said the words that finally revealed what the house meant to him. "It's supposed to be mine." I was 68 when I decided to sell the home where I had lived for 39 years. The first time my son called me in 5 years, he did not ask how I was. He did not ask whether my arthritis had worsened, whether I still kept his father's old workbench in the garage, or whether I had spent another Christmas eating dinner across from an empty chair. He asked why there was a for sale sign in front of the family house. His voice was sharp. "You can't sell it," he said. I looked through the kitchen window at the sign moving in the wind and answered, "You haven't visited this house in 5 years. Why does it matter now?" He became silent. Then he said the words that finally revealed what the house meant to him. "It's supposed to be mine." I was 68 when I decided to sell the home where I had lived for 39 years. My husband Paul and I bought it when our son Michael was 2. It was a 2-story colonial outside Columbus, Ohio, with faded blue shutters, a maple tree in the front yard, and a basement that flooded every spring until Paul installed a drainage system himself. We raised 2 children there. Michael, our oldest, was 41 when this happened. Our daughter Rachel was 37 and lived in Denver with her wife Lauren and their 6-year-old twins. Rachel called weekly. She visited when she could. Michael lived less than 2 hours away and had not stepped through my door since his father's funeral. That fact was the wound beneath everything. Paul died 6 years before I put the house on the market. He had pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis came late, and the final months moved quickly. Michael visited twice during treatment. The first time, he stayed 40 minutes because he had a conference call. The second time, he argued with Paul about the family business. Paul had owned a small custom cabinetry company called Turner Woodworks. Michael joined after college and worked there for 14 years. He believed he would eventually inherit it. Paul believed leadership had to be earned. Their conflict began years before the cancer. Michael was talented, ambitious, and impatient. He wanted to expand into commercial millwork, take larger loans, and open a second facility. Paul preferred slow growth. He had spent decades surviving recessions, late-paying contractors, and equipment failures. Debt frightened him. Michael called that fear. Paul called it experience. I usually stood between them. That was my mistake. I translated Paul's criticism into gentler language for Michael. I softened Michael's anger before repeating it to Paul. I prevented arguments from exploding, but I never forced them to speak honestly. Peace became delay. When Paul became ill, Michael expected to take control of the company immediately. Paul refused. He appointed his longtime foreman, Luis Ramirez, as temporary operations manager and asked an outside accountant to review the business. Michael felt humiliated. At the second hospital visit, he confronted his father. "You trust Luis more than your own son?" Paul was weak but clear. "I trust Luis to do the job he knows. I know the company. You know the parts you like." Michael turned toward me. "Are you hearing this?" I said, "This is not the time." Paul answered, "It is the only time I have." That sentence ended the conversation. Michael left. Paul died 3 weeks later. At the funeral, Michael stood beside me, shook hands, accepted condolences, and looked like the grieving son everyone expected. After the burial, the family gathered at the house. Michael asked when the will would be read. Rachel stared at him. "Dad has been dead 4 hours." He said, "I'm asking because the business needs decisions." The will left Turner Woodworks to me, with instructions that I could sell, keep, or transfer it after reviewing its financial condition. Michael expected me to give it to him. I did not. The accountant found the business carried more debt than Paul had admitted. Several large contracts were unprofitable. Equipment needed replacement. The company could survive, but only with restructuring. Michael presented a plan requiring another $700,000 in loans. Luis presented a smaller plan that cut costs, finished existing contracts, and focused on profitable residential work. I chose Luis's plan. Michael said I had betrayed him. I said, "I'm trying to protect what your father built." He replied, "You're giving it to a stranger." Luis was not a stranger. He had worked beside Paul for 22 years. But to Michael, blood created entitlement. I offered him a senior sales and project role with a clear path to leadership if performance improved. He refused. He resigned. Then he demanded I sell him the company for $1 because Dad intended it. There was no document saying that, only years of assumption. When I refused, he stopped speaking to me. At first, I believed the silence would last weeks, then months. I called on his birthday. No answer. I mailed Christmas gifts to his children, Ethan and Chloe. The packages were returned the first year and accepted the next, but I received no acknowledgement. I sent messages. I apologized for the pain, though I did not apologize for the business decision. He replied once, "You chose Luis. Live with it." I did. Turner Woodworks survived. Luis and I worked with the accountant, sold unused equipment, renegotiated the building lease, and reduced debt. I knew little about cabinetry operations, but I understood invoices, payroll, and stubborn men. I visited the shop 3 times a week. Within 2 years, the company became profitable again. Luis eventually purchased a minority share through a structured agreement. We created employee bonuses. Paul would have been proud. Michael never asked. He built his own remodeling company. From what I heard, it did well at first. I learned about his life through other people. His wife, Amanda, occasionally sent photographs of the children to Rachel. Michael blocked me on social media. When Ethan graduated middle school, I was not invited. When Chloe had surgery, I found out afterward. I told myself I would respect his boundary. That phrase can become a way of accepting cruelty without naming it. He had the right not to see me. He did not have the right to pretend the separation caused no harm. 5 years passed. During those years, the house became heavier, not physically at first, emotionally. Every room held a version of the family that no longer existed. Michael's height marks remained inside the pantry door. Paul's coats hung in the hall closet for 3 years because removing them felt like another death. The dining room table could seat 10, but I usually ate in the kitchen. The upstairs bathroom leaked. The roof needed replacement. The property taxes rose. I began sleeping in the downstairs guest room because my knees hurt on the stairs. Rachel said, "Mom, this house is too much." I answered, "It's the family home." She asked, "Which family?" That hurt, because she was right. The house no longer held family. It held evidence. My neighbor June was 72 and recently moved into a smaller condominium. She had a community garden, an elevator, and neighbors who noticed if she missed morning coffee. She took me to see a townhome development near a lake. 1 level, 2 bedrooms, small patio, no basement. I liked it immediately and felt guilty. Selling the house seemed like abandoning Paul. Then I remembered Paul complaining about gutters, snow removal, and the furnace. He would have sold it years earlier if he had lived alone. I contacted a real estate agent named Marissa Cole. We reviewed the market. The house had appreciated considerably. After repairs and closing costs, I could purchase the townhome, invest the difference, and create education accounts for all 4 grandchildren. I did not call Michael before listing it. That was deliberate. Part of me believed he had surrendered the right to participate. Part of me wanted him to discover the sign and feel what it was like to be excluded. That was not my proudest motive. The sign appeared on a Tuesday. Michael called Thursday morning. "How did you know?" I asked. "Ethan saw the listing online." My grandson had been looking at the house. That softened me for 1 second. Then Michael said, "Take it off the market." "No, you didn't even tell me." You haven't spoken to me in 5 years. That doesn't mean you sell our family history. History is not the same as property. Dad wanted me to have that house. No, he didn't. He told me I'd always have a place there. You did. You chose not to come. His breathing changed. This is punishment. It is a sale. You're doing this because I wouldn't forgive you. I'm doing this because I cannot maintain a 4-bedroom house alone. You could transfer it to me. There it was. He did not ask whether I needed help. He asked for the asset. What would you pay? I said. He sounded shocked. Pay? Yes. It's supposed to stay in the family. That does not mean free. He accused me of caring more about money than my grandchildren. I asked when I had last seen them. He hung up. The next day, Amanda called. She was more controlled. She said they had always assumed Michael would receive the house because Rachel lived out of state and I had the business. I do not have the business as a gift, I said. I worked to save it. She replied, Michael lost everything because of that decision. He left a job offer. He lost his father's trust. That was between him and Paul. She became quiet. Then she said Ethan had dreamed of living in the house while attending college nearby. No one had told me. Again, plans had been built around my property without me. I said the listing would remain. Michael arrived at the house that Saturday. I saw his truck in the driveway and nearly dropped my coffee. He had a key, an old one. He entered without knocking. For 5 years, he refused to cross the threshold. Now the sale brought him through the door. He looked older, more tired. He stood in the hallway staring at me. You changed the paint. That happened 3 years ago. He walked through the rooms as if inspecting damage. In the living room, he touched the mantel Paul built. You can't let strangers tear this apart. The buyers may love it. They won't understand it. Neither do you anymore. He turned sharply. What is that supposed to mean? You think the house proves you belong to this family while your behavior says otherwise. He accused me of choosing Luis again. I said, Luis has nothing to do with this. He always has something to do with it. Then came the midpoint revelation. Michael's remodeling company was failing. He had taken large loans to expand quickly. 2 commercial projects went bad. A developer had not paid. Tax debt accumulated. He and Amanda had already sold their home and were renting. The family house was not only sentimental, he needed it. He had planned to move in, use part of it as an office, and borrow against its value to stabilize his business. I stared at him. You plan to mortgage my house. Once it was mine. It is not yours. It will be eventually. I may live another 20 years. His face changed. That's not what I meant. It is exactly what your plan requires. He said he would care for me if I transferred the house. I laughed from shock. You have not visited in 5 years, and now you are offering care in exchange for property? That's unfair. No, it is accurate. He said family should help family. I asked why that rule applied only when he needed something. He left angry. That evening, I cried harder than I had since Paul's death, not because Michael wanted money, because I finally understood his silence had never been only grief. It was leverage. He believed withholding himself would make me regret choosing Luis and eventually surrender the business or house. He had waited for me to give in. I had waited for love to overcome pride. Neither happened. The sale moved forward. We received 2 offers. One came from a young family with 3 children. The other came from an investor offering more cash. I preferred the family. Michael learned through the online listing status and sent a legal letter claiming he had an equitable interest based on family contributions. My attorney, Denise Parker, reviewed it. He had no ownership. He had performed repairs years earlier, but Paul paid him through the company. The claim was weak. Still, it delayed the sale. Rachel flew in from Denver. She was furious with him. They met at my dining room table. The last time both children sat there, Paul was alive. Rachel said, "You disappeared for 5 years and now you sue Mom?" Michael replied, "I'm protecting Dad's legacy. You're protecting your debt." He looked at me. "You told her." "I told my daughter what is happening." He accused us of teaming up against him. Rachel answered, "No, you keep standing alone and calling it betrayal." That sentence shook him. He left. Rachel stayed for a week. We packed dishes, photographs, and Paul's tools. She asked whether I planned to divide the sale proceeds equally. "I plan to buy a home and support myself." "Good. Then education accounts for the grandchildren." "All of them?" "Yes." "Even Michael's children?" "They did not create this." Rachel hugged me. That was the difference between inheritance as entitlement and generosity as choice. I could help Ethan and Chloe without giving Michael control. Michael's legal claim failed. The court did not produce a dramatic trial. His attorney withdrew after reviewing records. The buyers completed inspection. Then the stronger final revelation arrived through Luis. He called and asked me to come to the shop. In Paul's old office, he opened a locked metal drawer that had not been used in years. Inside was a sealed envelope addressed to Michael. Paul had given it to Luis during his illness. "Why didn't you deliver it?" I asked. "He told me to give it only if Michael tried to claim the company or house as something owed." My hands shook. The letter was not a will. It was a father's confession. Paul wrote that he had encouraged Michael's expectations for years. He had said things like, "This will all be yours someday," during good periods, then withdrew trust when Michael made risky decisions. He admitted using future inheritance to control his son. He wrote, "I taught you to confuse love with succession. That was my failure. You believed the company and house would prove I respected you. I should have told you respect is not transferred through deeds." Paul explained why he chose Luis as temporary manager. Not because he loved Luis more, because Luis accepted limits. Michael did not. Then Paul wrote something I had not known. Months before diagnosis, Michael had used company vendor accounts to purchase materials for private jobs without authorization. He repaid part of it, but not all. Paul discovered the issue and confronted him privately. That was the real break in trust. Michael had never told me. Paul wrote, "Your mother does not know because I did not want her carrying one more conflict. If you ever ask her to sacrifice her security to repair your choices, tell her the truth first." I sat in Paul's office and felt betrayed by both men. Paul hid the misconduct from me. Michael built years of anger around a decision he knew had another reason. Luis said, "Paul thought he was protecting you." "Everyone protects me by taking away information." I took the letter. I called Michael. We met at the house. He read it in the living room. His face collapsed. "You knew," I said. He nodded. "How much?" 38,000. "Why?" "I had a side project. Cash flow stopped. I thought I could replace it before Dad noticed." "You stole from the company." "I borrowed. Without permission." He covered his face. "Dad never forgave me. He offered you a job. Under Luis, with a path back. I was ashamed. So you punished me." He began crying. "I thought if you gave me the company, it meant Dad had been wrong." I understood then. He did not only want assets. He wanted a verdict. If I transferred the company or house, he could tell himself his father had trusted him after all. I could not give him that. I said, "Your father loved you. He also did not trust your judgment. Both were true." Michael looked at the letter. "He used inheritance to control me." "Yes." "And then left you to deal with it?" "Yes." For the first time, we agreed without defending Paul. Michael asked whether I would stop the sale. "No." He looked wounded. "Even now?" "Especially now. This house cannot keep carrying every unfinished argument in our family." He said he had nowhere stable to go. I offered practical help, not the house. I would pay directly for 6 months of financial counseling and contribute toward a rental deposit if he disclosed debts fully and stopped legal action. He laughed bitterly. Terms? Yes. Family shouldn't need terms. Family without terms is how we reach this point. He refused, then called 3 days later and accepted. The house sold. The young family bought it. On closing day, I walked through each room. I touched the pantry door with the height marks. I left it unpainted. The buyers had asked to keep it. The mother said, "It feels like part of the house." I gave her the old storm window instructions and showed her where the basement valve stuck. Then I handed over the keys. I expected devastation. I felt grief, also relief. My new townhome was smaller and quiet. For the first week, I woke confused because the furnace sounded different. I missed the maple tree. I did not miss the stairs. I created education accounts for all 4 grandchildren. The money is controlled by a trustee and paid directly for tuition or training. Michael cannot borrow against it. Rachel approved. Michael called it another example of distrust. I said, "It is an example of structure." He stopped arguing. His business eventually entered bankruptcy. That was painful. He sold equipment, negotiated tax payments, and took a project manager job with another contractor. For the first time in years, he worked under someone else's authority. He hated it. Then he became good at it. He began therapy, not because I required it after 6 months, because he chose to continue. Our reconciliation was slow. He first visited my townhome 8 months after the sale. He brought no apology speech. He fixed a loose cabinet hinge. I said, "You do not have to earn the visit." He replied, "I know, I just saw it." We drank coffee. He asked about my knees. That simple question nearly made me cry. I saw Ethan and Chloe again. They were awkward at first. They had heard I chose money over family. I did not correct their father's story immediately. Then Ethan asked directly, "Why did you sell Grandpa's house?" "Because it was my house to maintain, and I needed a safer life." Dad said he wanted it. "I know. Why didn't you give it to him?" "Because giving someone a valuable asset does not solve the choices that made them need it." He thought about that. Teenagers understand more than adults expect when you speak plainly. Michael later apologized for keeping the children away. That was harder to forgive than the lawsuit. "You took years from all of us," I said. "I wanted you to feel what I felt." I did. Did it help? No, he cried. Neither did I. Some pain is too old for tears in the moment. We rebuild through repetition now. Monthly dinners, phone calls, birthdays. He still becomes defensive when money is discussed. I still become controlling when I fear he is making another reckless decision. We are not healed in a dramatic sense. We are present. That is better than silence. Turner Woodworks continues under Luis and an employee ownership plan. I sold my remaining shares gradually. Part of the proceeds funded my retirement. Part went to employee bonuses. Michael was angry at first that he did not receive the company. Later, he said, "Dad would have liked the workers owning it." I answered, "He might have." That was the first time we spoke about Paul without using him as a weapon. I keep Paul's letter in a locked drawer. Michael has a copy. The original belongs to neither of us emotionally. It belongs to the truth we avoided. Paul was loving, hardworking, and controlling. Michael was gifted, hurt, and dishonest. I was loyal, patient, and too willing to smooth conflict until resentment hardened. No one was only one thing. The family house was never the villain. It held birthdays, arguments, Christmas mornings, hospital equipment, unpaid bills, and decades of ordinary life. But at the end, we asked it to do too much. Prove who belonged, prove who was forgiven, prove who inherited love. A house cannot answer those questions. It can only be owned, maintained, lived in, and eventually transferred. The new family sends me a Christmas card every year. The maple tree is still there. They painted the shutters dark green. Michael saw the photograph once and said, "Blue was better." I laughed. "It is not ours." The words felt final and peaceful. My son refused to visit for 5 years because he believed absence would force me to choose him over the decisions his father made. He returned when he thought the house was leaving. At first, I believed that meant he loved the house more than me. The truth was more complicated. He believed the house was evidence that he still had a place in the family. He did not understand he could have a place without owning anything. I did not understand that selling the house might be the only way to stop property from speaking for us. Now, when Michael visits, he enters a townhome with no childhood bedroom, no father's workshop, and no inheritance waiting in the walls. He comes because I am there. That is the relationship I wanted all along. A year after the sale, the young family invited me back for coffee. At first, I refused. I told myself returning would make me sentimental and interfere with their ownership. Then, the mother, Claire, wrote that they had found something behind a loose panel in the basement workshop. I went on a Sunday afternoon. The maple tree had been trimmed. Bicycles leaned against the garage. A basketball hoop stood near the driveway. The house looked alive in a different way. Inside the workshop, Claire handed me a narrow wooden box. Paul had built it. The lid was marked with Michael's initials. Inside were old woodworking plans, a pocket knife, and a photograph of Paul and Michael standing beside the first cabinet they built together. There was also a note. Michael, you rush because you can see what something might become. That is a gift. Learn to respect the time required to build it. Dad. The note was dated 20 years before Paul's death. I called Michael from the workshop. He did not answer. I sent a photograph. He called within minutes. Where are you? At the old house. His voice tightened. Why? I told him about the box. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he asked whether I could bring it to him. I said yes. When I delivered it, he held the pocket knife in his palm and stared at the plans. He did believe in me, he whispered. Yes. Then why did he stop? He did not stop loving you. He stopped trusting some of your decisions. Michael looked angry again. I almost softened the answer. Then I remembered how much damage softening had done. I said, love and trust are not the same thing. He nodded slowly. That box did more for him than the house ever could. He did not need 4 bedrooms, a mortgage-free asset, or a deed with his name. He needed proof that his father had once seen his gift clearly. The tragedy was that Paul had hidden encouragement inside objects while speaking mostly through criticism. Michael had hidden shame beneath anger. I had hidden fear beneath patience. We had all spent years communicating indirectly, then blaming one another for misunderstanding. After that, Michael began rebuilding more honestly. He did not reopen a company. He discovered he preferred managing complex projects for someone else. Without the pressure to prove he was an owner, he became calmer. His employer promoted him after 2 years. When he told me, he said, I did it without borrowing anything. I smiled. That sounds expensive emotionally. He laughed. Our family also began a new tradition. Instead of gathering at one inherited house, we rotate holidays. Rachel hosts summer reunions in Denver. Michael hosts Thanksgiving some years. I host smaller Christmas dinners in my townhome community room. At first, I hated the rented tables and folding chairs. Then I noticed no one disappeared into old rooms or repeated old roles. The grandchildren played games in a space without family ghosts. We brought photographs, recipes, and Paul's wooden serving tray. Those were enough to create continuity. One Christmas, Ethan asked whether family homes always have to be sold eventually. I said, every house changes hands someday. He looked troubled. Then how do people keep memories? By telling them. That answer surprised me as I said it. I had treated walls like storage for love. But walls forget, people remember, distort, repair, and pass stories forward. The responsibility belongs to us. Michael and I later recorded several conversations about Paul. Not polished interviews, just coffee at my table with a phone recording between us. We talked about the business, The flood in the basement, the fishing trip where Paul lost the boat keys, and the argument neither of us handled well. Michael told stories I had never heard. I told him about Paul's final weeks in more detail than I had before. We both cried. Those recordings now sit in a shared family archive. Rachel added photographs. The grandchildren added captions. The family history survived the sale because we finally chose to preserve it deliberately. That was another lesson the house taught me after it was gone. Inheritance is not only what remains after death. It is what a family decides to carry without using it as a weapon. I inherited Paul's avoidance along with his property. Michael inherited Paul's ambition and fear of failure. Rachel inherited the habit of leaving conflict before it consumed her. The grandchildren inherited stories without having to inherit debt. That feels healthier. My townhome has a small patio now filled with herbs and 2 tomato plants that produce more leaves than tomatoes. June lives 3 doors away. We drink coffee most mornings. If I do not appear, she texts. That kind of community would have been impossible in the old house, where privacy sometimes became isolation. I still miss the front porch during rain. I do not miss waiting for a son who believed the address itself should call him home. Now he knows he has to choose the drive, and when his truck appears outside, I no longer wonder whether he came for the property. There is nothing here he expects to inherit soon. He comes in carrying groceries, repair tools, or nothing at all. The visits are ordinary. That is what makes them precious. The family house gave us a beginning. Selling it forced us to create a relationship that could survive without it. In the end, that was not the loss of our family legacy. It was the first time we understood what the legacy actually was.